seated. When someone is feeling the heat, we often whine, "I didn't sign up for this." Well, it's good to know what you are signing up for, isn't it? For just about anything. And the same is true for being a Christian. Our gospel lesson today is about counting the cost. In the text, there is a parable of a rash builder who presumably did not evaluate all that was needed to build a large structure, and he faced ridicule for his failure. And then there's the reasonable king who must weigh his resources against those of a formidable opponent, and he decides that it's wise to negotiate for peace rather than to lose his smaller entire army. So they both have a moral, you could say: look before you leap. And our gospel text is about this. It's about counting the cost of Christian discipleship. Because the reality is, it is costly to be a Christian. But before we look at this text, two things about the idea of cost. One, when we talk about cost, we don't mean earn. We don't earn our place into Christian discipleship. We don't follow Christ in order to be accepted. We follow Christ out of love and gratitude because we have been accepted. God loved us and called us to be Christ's disciples, though we are unworthy. He accepts us, so we follow. Our discipleship is a pilgrimage begun out of love for Christ with a desire to please Him. Secondly, as a Christian, we are not called to make a decision. We are called to be disciples. You see, the issue becomes not, did you ask Jesus into your heart, but what are you doing about it? Is your faith a living faith? Is it forming you into a disciple of Jesus? You see, there's no such thing as a person who believes in Jesus but does not follow Jesus. Now, for sure, those of us who do follow, we follow all too often from too great a distance. Or we follow and are easily distracted. But true faith is a following faith. We may fall, but we repent, and we return, and we begin afresh. The greatest challenge in our culture today, especially for the Church of Jesus Christ, is not our national, moral, ethical, or social issues. They're important. I mean, the hot button issues that surround homosexuality, gay marriage, the transgender movement, abortion, these are extremely important matters. And as Christians, we must have, I believe, a traditional and biblical commitment regarding these matters. Still, the greatest challenge in our nation and society is, will the church be the church? You see, for the church, the challenge isn't so much moral and ethical, though involved, it is theological. You see, if we are committed to Jesus Christ and to His Word, these other issues will have a clear and reasoned explanation. One that is in keeping with God our Creator and our Redeemer and His will for humanity. It's not for the human race to decide who we are and to whom we owe our allegiance. As Luke has made it clear up to this point, everyone on the planet, everyone owes their all to Jesus. And this is what Jesus demands in His call to discipleship. And as you heard in our reading, He makes His case, He makes this call in stark terms. And He does it in 2 different verses from our text. One, He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And in verse 33, so therefore, if any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Wow, that's heavy. What does he mean by stating things in such terms? Does he expect you to hate your family? Well, to help us understand what he means, 2 things to consider. 1, the context, and 2, literary device. We start with that one. His words are hyperbole. I mean, we say things like, and you may be shortly, I am so hungry, I could eat a horse. Well, you can't. And you wouldn't. But we know by your extreme exaggeration that you're really, really hungry. Well, Jesus' words are hyperbole too. Yet, he chose them for a reason. And there is a message behind his choice of words. And we also get a better sense of what he means when we just think of the larger context. As we've seen earlier in Luke, he is observing, or tracking, I should say, Jesus' itinerary. He mentions it routinely. During his 3 years, as we've seen, Jesus has ministered throughout Israel. Galilee, Samaria, on occasion Judea, Perea, and even over on the coast in Tyre and Sidon. Toward the latter part of his earthly ministry, Luke records that Jesus begins to set his course toward Jerusalem, this time for the last time. We read this back in Luke 9:51. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. It was time. And this particular route to Jerusalem is a journey to the cross. Now, a cross is not a popular destination. So, when Luke records that large crowds surrounded Jesus, the reader becomes a little curious. And we begin to see that Luke is about to make a point. I mean, crowds are clamoring for Jesus, yet his journey is to a place of abandonment and death. A place where people who might be nearby scatter at the sights and the sounds and the smells. So, the explanation of Jesus' current popularity must be that the people are reading Jesus wrong. I mean, many of them, as we know, saw him as their political hope. Some, their ticket to health and wealth. Others, just like the show of a wonder worker. But clearly, as Luke, I should say, begins to unveil, Jesus senses their misconceptions. They don't know what he's about. And he begins to whittle down his true followers. He did it earlier. Remember when he talked about his body and his blood? You must eat my body and drink my blood in John 6. And many of them left. Like, hey, I don't get this. Well, here, he does it by his shocking references to familial hatred and cross-bearing as he describes discipleship. That's what it's like. This is what I'm telling you discipleship is. And he uses hate and a cross. But again, it simply can't be, and we know that Jesus is not proposing that a true disciple hate his family. And we know throughout the New Testament, Jesus upholds the family often, and especially when he talks about the marriage relationship, it's held in high honor. And what do we read in the 5th commandment of the 10? Honor your father and your mother. We also begin to see what he means by the word hate when we compare other passages. For example, in Matthew 10:37, we read similarly, quote, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." And thinking back to the Old Testament, we see that same kind of language in the story of Jacob and Leah and Rachel. Remember that story in Genesis? Jacob wanted Rachel to be his wife. Her father Laban said, okay, but you have to work for her. So Jacob does the work, years. Somehow, he was tricked, and instead of Rachel, Laban gave Jacob his other daughter, Leah. Well, Jacob still wanted Rachel. So he had to work again, some more. And he was finally given Rachel to be his wife as well. And here's how Genesis records it in chapter 29. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Again, that word hate there. But we know Jacob did not hate Leah. As one writer suggested, when the word hate is used here, and again later with Jesus, it does not speak of hate as, quote, some wild-eyed raging fury, but as a lesser secondary attachment. So Jacob did not hate Leah. He preferred Rachel more. Jesus doesn't want us to hate anyone. In fact, in another place, Jesus assumes that a disciple will even love one's enemies. No, Jesus is talking about wholehearted devotion and loyalty. He can't be our secondary attachment. That's what he's saying. The Reformation Study Bible concludes, quote, "Devotion to Christ must be so wholehearted that even attachment to parents and family must not be allowed to stand in the way." Paul in the book of Colossians writes, "And Jesus is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. Jesus must be preeminent in our lives, for we are his disciples. We also get a sense of the meaning of this extreme language describing discipleship when we consider what Jesus says regarding the idea of taking up one's cross. Now, I'm afraid we've lost the impact of Jesus' words by making this phrase much too familiar and common in our conversations. Let's say we have a cantankerous family member, or a wayward child, or a painful joint, and we say, well, I guess that's my cross to bear in life. Well, okay, in one sense, that can be a helpful thing to say. We know what you mean when you say that. But that's not what Jesus meant when he talked about cross-bearing. Cross-bearing really isn't about things that happen to us. Rather, it is a conscious choice of a certain lifestyle. The cross we bear is the way we choose to look at life. Earlier, Luke records Jesus as saying, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world, yet loses himself?" You see, the ideology of our society is love yourself foremost. Have it your way. Or I did it my way. Even to the point now of determining your own human identity. We want it all. And they don't call it an iPhone for nothing. As per our psalmist, this is a way of selfishness that ignores God and practices wickedness as if it were good. And our psalmist says that person, that way, will be blown away as chaff in the wind. It will not stand up, he says, to God's judgment. For seeking one's way is to lose it, Jesus said. But the way of Christ is forever. And ironically, our death to self, denying ourselves, is life in him. Dying to self is not losing. Dying to self is a gift. For the gospel liberates. Not for us to do what we want. It frees us for obedience to Christ, where there is true happiness. You see, disciples are made not by us ascending to God. Disciples are made by God descending to us. And he frees us by driving us outside of ourselves by the ministry of word and sacrament, so that now we look up to Christ in faith and out to others in love. The Christian life, as someone once said, is a long walk in the same direction. As Christ's disciples, may he help us to be to more and more put off Christ, put on Christ, to put off self and to put on Christ and follow after him.